I think everyone knows by now that Abbey Road is the album of all time. You could literally Google any top 100 albums list and Abbey Road would probably be first, or at least in the top 5. The iconic pose of the four Beatles walking along the zebra crossing has been referenced millions of times in mainstream media, and if an alien came by on Earth and wanted to discover human music, you'd probably show him Abbey Road. This insane popularity has resulted in a lot of people naturally calling this album the best album of all time. But why? Why did this album, out of all the albums in history, get this godlike status? Why did it get so popular in the first place, and why do people still talk about it? What makes Abbey Road the best album of all time? Before we get to the video, I noticed a little something while I was editing and I think I have to explain it to you guys. While I was recording, I wasn't sitting cross-legged like I usually do, and I had no idea what to do with my hand. So it's kinda just staying limp on the floor for 3 whole minutes and I look more artistic than usual. But don't worry, cause it'll get worse later. I wanna start off this video by saying that Abbey Road is not my favorite Beatles album, but I still agree with the status it has. And also, I've said the name like 10 times already, so I'm gonna stop saying it. The first step to understanding this album is to go listen to it. Okay, now that you've done that, do you think it's the best album of all time? If yes, then my job here is done. If no, go listen to it again. No, but seriously, there's a lot of people who go listen to the album and think it's good, but it's not like the craziest thing in the world. And I get it, because that's how I was at first too. A point that a lot of Beatles fans make is that Abbey Road set the groundwork for modern songwriting and it inspired thousands of songs. So when you go listen to it and you think it doesn't sound like anything special, it's because everyone got their sound from it. Your favorite band was probably inspired from the Beatles. You can't really blame them from sounding like everyone else when everyone else copied from them, you know? They were like the first ones to do it. But to understand this is easier said than done. You hear all these people saying that the Beatles were the first ones to make this type of music, but why do you care? It's not like they're impressing you. What you need to do to really grasp how the Beatles changed mainstream music is to go back in time. If you follow the Beatles discography in a chronological order, you'll notice that the 60s music scene was changing with them. They were the ones changing the music scene album by album, and everyone followed after them. Some people say that you need to go back and listen to 50s music and then go to the Beatles and understand the change, but I don't think you need to do all of that. We're gonna simply start from Please Please Me. Come on, come on, come on, come on, baby. Come on, baby. Come on and work it on that. Please Please Me is the Beatles at the lowest point of their professionalism. But that's just simply because it was their first album. They weren't thinking of changing the world, they were just 4 lads from Liverpool trying to make some music. And that's exactly why I love this album so much. The beginning of the Beatles' career has its hits and misses, but I love how much spirit there is into Please Please Me. The whole thing was recorded in just one day and you could instantly tell that these boys had talent. The songs are catchy, energetic, and it's just a wonderful vibe. You can even tell from the interviews during this era how happy the band was.
We expected them to be very different, but they weren't at all.
Yeah.
The accent was the only thing, it was the only difference. Lovely.
Lennon has said that the songwriting was mostly inspired by Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers, and the lyrics were just thrown into the songs, which kinda shocks. Editing crisis here. Looks like I finally decided to do something with my hand now. Instead of letting it stay limp on the floor, I started playing with a thing between my legs. No, it's not what you're thinking, unfortunately. For some reason, I got nervous and I started playing with a bit of my jeans while I was talking. But it looks so wrong. Still, if you want to truly understand the Beatles, you gotta start from this album. And luckily for you, this album is amazing. It's super easy to get into, which explains the instant popularity of the band, and it features amazing songs like I Saw Her Standing There, Do You Want to Know a Secret, Twist and Shout, which yes, it's a cover, and Love Me Do. Love Me Do is a little bit weird because it's the one song everyone uses to compare how much the Beatles have changed. Look, they went from Love Me Do to A Day in the Life, isn't that crazy? And that's probably what I'm gonna do as well, but nonetheless, this album is amazing. It has its magic despite the fact that it's just a bunch of simple pop songs. The pop songs obviously continue on the second album as well, but they start to get slightly more unique. It sounds like the band was putting more thought into the songwriting despite the fact that there's some hit and misses. But my favorite songs from With the Beatles are All My Loving, It Won't Be Long, and Roll Over Beethoven, which I love.
Gonna write a little letter, gonna mail it to my local DJ. It's a rocky little record, I want my jockey to play.
Just the way all the words are pronounced in the song just scratches the right part of your brain. After these 2 albums, the Beatles found instant success in the UK, but surprisingly not in the US. This wasn't because the songs weren't good enough for America, it was because they were kinda getting fucked over by their label over there. I'm not gonna get too much into it because it's confusing, but the release of their first album in America got delayed for 1 whole year. They changed the cover and the title and they made it really ugly, and it ended up releasing 10 days before their second album. So they were competing against themselves in the charts. But anyways, the Beatles refused to tour America until they got a #1 hit. I know it sounds kinda cocky, but they didn't want to be just a little number that will fade away to American audiences after a couple of weeks. So they waited for that #1 hit. Luckily for them, their next single was found by a very lucky guy, Brian Epstein. Brian took control of the band's marketing in America, and soon after that, the Beatles became a huge success in the country. This brings us to the start of Beatlemania. On the 7th of February 1964, the Beatles landed on the John F. Kennedy Airport with 3,000 fans waiting for them. This is where the iconic images of fans screaming over them have their start. 2 days later, the Beatles performed in the Ed Sullivan Show to an audience of 73 million viewers, another very iconic part of their career. I think it was George who said this, but apparently there were less crimes reported while the Beatles' performance was being aired. They did only perform for like 30 minutes, but I guess for those 30 minutes, America was hypnotized. The initial response to the Beatles in America was a little bit negative, but that was only because the president got shot like 3 months ago. The Beatles, in a way, brought excitement back to American lives, and their style started being seen as a form of rebellion. I know it's ridiculous to look back at it now and think that the Beatles style was somehow rebellious. When you think of the world in the 60s, you probably imagine everyone looking like the Beatles, you know, black suits and the big hair. But the hair was actually mocked at first by American audiences, and then the youth started using it as a symbol of revolution. This giant success the Beatles got in America wasn't just good news for them, but for their whole country as well. Bands from the UK soon started to make legendary careers on the other side of the ocean, and this phenomenon was named the British Invasion. The British Invasion made the careers of bands like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who, the Hollies, and much more. So the world was already following in the Beatles' footsteps. But back to the music, in 1964 we get what I think is the best album of the Beatlemania era, A Hard Day's Night.
It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog.
A Hard Day's Night is in my opinion the Beatles at the peak of their songwriting abilities when it comes to simple pop songs. Yes, all the songs are under 3 minutes and they still talk about love, but the lyrics have evolved. The band starts to talk about jealousy, working life, money, and loneliness and sadness. All of a sudden, the band was speaking to the everyday man, and was doing it in a beautiful way. Except for the lyrics, the songs have changed a lot as well. They're more unique, you can tell them apart from one another, and they're starting to evolve into something new. Songs like And I Love Her and Things We Said Today brought a sound that wasn't really there on the first 2 albums.
And I love her.
And except those, you had other amazing songs like A Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, If I Fell, and more.
I don't care too much for money, money can't buy me love.
It's a really solid album as a whole, and in a way it foreshadows what the Beatles were gonna become. This album also brought the first Beatles film, but I don't really give a shit about that. Okay, I'm back for one last time because this might be the worst thing I've done in this video. For some reason, I got tired and I decided to just straight up open my legs in front of the camera. What the fuck is wrong with me? Beatlemania continued even after the release of A Hard Day's Night because the Beatles were about to start their world tour. This meant more screaming fans on the airport, more women for John and Paul to sleep with when they weren't sleeping with each other, and more crazy shit. In 1964, they also got the honor to meet Bob Dylan, which I can't wait to see on the biopics because they're probably gonna introduce him as some old Disney character. It's gonna be like the Avengers getting back together. Dylan introduced the band to weed, and there's a lot of fans who say that this affected their music a lot. But beside the weed, the band was also inspired by Dylan's songwriting and lyricism. I think after this whole thing, George and Dylan became close friends, and hence this clip.
He was one of them.
He was our idol.
Bob was our hero.
Not an idol, but we just heard his record as.
Anyways, the band kept touring and they started to get more political by standing up to segregation at one of their shows. But when it came to their work, they still didn't have total control of everything. This brings us to Beatles for Sale and Help, the last 2 albums of the Beatlemania era. I'm gonna be honest with you, Beatles for Sale is probably my least favorite album of the Beatles. The touring and traveling and movies and everything didn't give them much time to write any new songs, so the band started featuring covers again. The album consisted of 6 covers and 8 original songs. But in those 8 original songs, you could tell that Paul and John were starting to get even more chemistry together. My favorite songs from this album are No Reply and 8 Days a Week.
I ain't got nothing but love, babe. 8 days a week.
Help, on the other side, is a much better album, and it's kind of like a wrap-up to the whole Beatlemania era. The album was another soundtrack for another Beatles movie, but what brought attention to people is that John was literally screaming for help. He wasn't going with the cute love songs anymore. He wanted
Help! I need somebody help, not just anybody help.
At first, John himself didn't realize what he was doing with the song, but I guess subconsciously he was trying to tell the world that he couldn't do this anymore. The constant touring and attention and press was taking a toll on him, and soon he had to take a break. 1965 is also the year where John and George got introduced to LSD. A lot of people think this was a choice, but they actually got roofied at their dentist's house. The dentist put LSD in their coffee without knowing what LSD can do to a person. Because of that, John and George got their first trip unexpectedly, and it changed their life forever. Anyways, John's scream for help finally got an answer because for the first time in forever, the Beatles were in the studio making an album and focusing on that album. No other distractions. But while the Beatles were on tour, there was another band who kinda passed them in the race of music pioneering, and that was of course the Beach Boys with Pet Sounds.
God only knows what I'd be without you.
Paul listened to this album and his whole perspective about music changed. He even said that God Only Knows is one of the best songs ever made. So the weed, the time off, and Pet Sounds resulted into, let's say, the start of the Beatles psychedelic era. Rubber Soul. With this new inspiration from the Beach Boys, Rubber Soul was the first Beatles album to have a proper theme to it. All the songs were different, but they had the same vibe. I know that's something that's been normalized now, but up to this point all the Beatles albums were basically just single compilations. I know I said that this was the start of the Beatles psychedelic era, but Rubber Soul doesn't really get as experimentative as the next two Beatles albums. Just imagine that if Sgt Pepper is LSD, then Rubber Soul is weed. I think this marks the point where the Beatles go from, oh my god, this band is really good, to this is the best band of all time and it's gonna change music forever. I don't know if you can tell, but I really like Rubber Soul. It's in my top 3 Beatles albums. Even though it doesn't feature any crazy experimental songs like Tomorrow Never Knows or A Day in the Life, the songwriting shows an insane improvement. From start to finish, every song is amazing, the production is beautiful, and the lyrics keep evolving more and more. It just gives you that vibe of being high in a beautiful forest, and it's incredible. My favorite songs from this album are Norwegian Wood, Girl, Think for Yourself, Michelle, and In My Life. Anyways, the peace didn't last too long because the Beatles were getting ready for another world tour. Fights between the band had started since the production of Rubber Soul, and things were about to get even worse. During their world tour, they got kicked out of the Philippines because they refused to play for the First Lady, which was basically like an evil queen over there. And when they got to America, everyone hated them because John said, "The Beatles are bigger than Jesus." Fucking hell. With that comment, the Beatles became the first band in history to officially get cancelled. They got banned from radio stations and old people really hated them. The Beatles are literally the devil. But for now, this was the last straw for the band, and they finally decided to stop touring and focus only on their songwriting. 1 week before they wrapped up their touring days, they released another life-changing, incredible album with the name of Revolver. Revolver is the word the Beatles get psychedelic and Indian. George Harrison became a big fan of Ravi Shankar along with Indian and music culture and got Ravi to teach him the sitar. He slowly got the rest of the band into it as well, but George ended up being the only one who'd actually go and visit India regularly. Now, seeing I've made a career out of Britpop bands, obviously I'm a big fan of this album. Despite all the psychedelic stuff, Revolver was also a big improvement for the band's songwriting, and it went on to influence so many British bands for the next 4 decades. That's why I think the magic of this album, for me at least, lies on its most simple songs. I love songs like And Your Birds Can Sing, For No One, and Here, There and Everywhere. But the main selling point of Revolver was experimentation, LSD, and sitar. The lyrics of the band had gotten so much more abstract. They had moved on from love songs and now they were talking about life. With this, they also brought a sound that was never heard before in the West. A sound that made you feel like you were in a dream.
Leave me where I am. I'm only sleeping.
But the single most important song of Revolver is probably Tomorrow Never Knows.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
Tomorrow Never Knows is the most experimental song in the album, and seeing how it was the closing track of the album, it left the whole world wondering, what are the Beatles going to do next?
What are they gonna do now?
I think you all know where this is going by now, but Paul McCartney came up with the idea for the first concept album in history. The concept What if we were another band, but like the same band? Seeing how their touring days were over, Sgt Pepper was a performance of a band in an alternative unit, hence the long and ridiculous name. No one in their life would name themselves Sgt Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. There are people who want you to believe that Sgt Pepper has a coherent story behind it, but John himself shut that idea down.
It's called the first concept album. It doesn't go anywhere. Mr. Kite, all my contributions have absolutely nothing to do with this idea of Sgt. Pepper and his band. But it works, because we said it worked, and that's how it appeared.
Sgt. Pepper is my favorite Beatles album because there isn't a coherent story. It wouldn't fit for the band to make a little tale to go with the songs, because that limits the listener's imagination. And Sgt. Pepper is all about imagination. Instead, the band reaches their most abstract point, both lyrically and musically. Joe started getting interested in different philosophies, and combined with LSD and insane production, he wrote some of the best songs in the album. The production does not go without mention. Geoff Emerick, the sound engineer of the album, said everything on Sgt. Pepper had to be different. We had microphones right down in the belts of brass instruments, and headphones turned into microphones attached to violins. We used giant primitive oscillators to vary the speed of instrument and vocals, and we had tapes chopped to pieces and stuck together upside down and the wrong way around. Every single song of this album is amazing. It even features Ringo's best song, with a little help from my friends. The band was trying to capture the feeling of an LSD trip. This idea of going into a different world full of colors and beautiful but strange sounds, entering a new dimension. With this, the Beatles led to the creation of psychedelic rock, and they weren't just the first ones to do it, they were the best ones to do it. I don't think anyone ever topped them in this aspect. My favorite songs from this album are Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, She's Leaving Home, and what is deemed as the best song the band ever wrote, A Day in the Life. A Day in the Life not only served as the greatest ending track ever, it also marked the end of the Beatles' psychedelic era. Now it was time for them to go back to writing normal songs, but with all the things they had learned from this phase. They went to India for 3 months, and people make it look like this had some big effect on their career, but what really happened is that Ringo left after a week because the food was shit, Paul got bored, and John left because Maharishi was a creep. Anyways, the band went back to the studio to finally record a new album. These recorded sessions were gonna prove to be a little bit interesting, but in November of '68, the Beatles released the White Album.
My guitar gently weeps.
This was the time when John started dating Yoko, George wanted more of his songs in the album, and everyone was getting a little bit tired of Paul's control over everything. Even Ringo left the band for about 2 weeks. But despite all that, the White Album is deemed by big fans of the band as the best album of all time. The Beatles were done with their psychedelic stuff, and their songwriting had improved remarkably. The album features incredible songs like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Happiness is a Worm Gun, I Will, and Helter Skelter. The last one is believed to be one of the first ever metal songs in history.
Till I get to the bottom, I see you again. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
To me, this album is special because it was the first time the Beatles didn't actively try to be commercial. Yes, they had experimented before, but this time they just recorded a bunch of incredible songs and released them. There was no cover art, no concept, no nothing. There's a lot of people who say that the album would have been better if it wasn't a double-sided album and they just featured their best songs, but I disagree. We all know the joke about Revolution 9 being the worst Beatles song, but the fact they featured all these songs and they didn't filter anything because of commercial reasons makes this album even more special. I don't know if it was because the fights were slowly starting to appear, but the White Album is the Beatles at their realest. They were fully naked to the public. Well, not as naked as John and Yoko. I guess this idea of being naked to the public really stuck with Paul, because he decided for their next album, the Beatles were gonna record everything with cameras. Just a bunch of cameras zoomed in on their faces, recording the whole time, to see how a Beatles album really gets made. Now, believe it or not, this idea was fucking horrible. Instead of capturing the magic of making an album, they made a step-by-step guide on how to break up a band. None of the band members had realized how much tension there was in the group, and the camera sort of put a lens into that. This whole thing led to the creation of Let It Be and the iconic rooftop performance.
And all this greasy godly blue jay go.
Even though Let It Be was released after Abbey Road, most of the album was recorded before it, and in my opinion, it's not really the greatest work. Now for the moment we've all been waiting for. What makes Abbey Road the best album of all time? Because of the band's numerous fights, they were about to wrap things up with each other, but Paul wanted the group to get back together to record one last album. They were gonna leave behind all the fights they had, ignore the Let It Be and White Album sessions, and just get in the studio and record some songs just how they used to. This was the magic of Abbey Road. The band knew that the end was coming soon, so they wanted to make a record that celebrated everything they had achieved during these years. And what a record that was. Abbey Road has everything. Rock, pop, blues, progressive rock, you name. You open up with an instant classic like Come Together, and right after that you have Something, one of George's best songs.
You're asking me where my love will grow. I don't know.
And then after that you have Oh Darling, which features some of Paul's best vocal performances ever. The guitar there is insane as well.
And you told me you didn't need me anymore.
I Want You, She's So Heavy is an incredible song, and I used it on my last video as well. Here Comes the Sun, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, just incredible song after an incredible song. Abbey Road isn't just the biggest Beatles album, it's everything the band stands for. All those years of Beatlemania and experimentation and fights and everything all led up to this one album. They changed the music world forever, and every band after that started learning from them. So instead of fighting about which Beatles album was the best one, Abbey Road sort of unified everything into one record. That's why their cover art became so iconic and it got referenced so many times in mainstream media, because it symbolizes everything about the Beatles. Everything they stand for shown in one simple image. Now for the viewers at home who still might be skeptical, if you do decide to listen to everything I said, you start your journey here.
Love, love me do. You know I love you.
And end here. They didn't just achieve this without anyone making the path ready for them, they did all of this in 7 years. If Please Please Me released in 2018, this year we would have Abbey Road ready. It's insane. That's why Abbey Road is the best album of all time. That's all I had to say for this video. I know some of you probably expected a deep analysis on why every song on this album is perfect, and I can't do that, but for this album I think context is more important than everything. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, go listen to Abbey Road and see if I've changed your mind at all, and make sure to subscribe. Check out my Discord and Patreon, watch my other videos, bye bye!